A soldier came home from the war, only to find his home occupied by 3 children he had never met. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was the sound of a world ending. Not with a bang, but with a sigh of release. Staff Sergeant Michael Thorne stepped down onto the rain-slicked asphalt of the Oak Creek bus depot, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and diesel, a perfume he had not inhaled in 3 years. It was an alien scent, a ghost of a life he had packed away with his civilian clothes. His duffel bag landed on the pavement with a heavy thud. It felt impossibly cumbersome, filled with ghosts and grit from a land of dust and sun. He hoisted it to his shoulder, the canvas strap digging into the muscle like the weight of every patrol, every near miss, every letter he never sent. He had not called Sarah. The surprise was the whole point, the centerpiece of the fantasy he had curated for months in the suffocating heat of Kandahar. He pictured her face, the initial shock melting into tearful recognition. It was a scene he had replayed in his mind until it felt more real than the bone-jarring rattle of the MRAP. The walk was short, only a mile through the sleeping town. Nothing had changed. Mr. Fitzwilliam's prize-winning roses still drooped over the white picket fence on Elm Street. The Andersons still had that old, beat-up Ford pickup in their driveway, its paint faded a little more by the sun. It was a mosaic of comforting, mundane details, each one a small anchor pulling him back to a reality he craved. The quiet was the most jarring part. Not the tense, listening quiet of an overnight watch, but a deep, peaceful suburban silence, punctuated only by the distant bark of a dog and the rhythmic chirp of crickets. It was the sound of safety. The sound of home. He turned the corner onto his own street, his heart beginning to hammer a frantic cadence against his ribs. The oak tree in their front yard stood like a silent, leafy sentinel, just as he remembered. But as he drew closer to the small blue house, the fine hairs on his neck began to prickle. Something was wrong. His training took over, a cold switch flipping in his brain. The hope and sentimentality evaporated, replaced by a methodical assessment of his surroundings. The lawn was overgrown, blades of grass long and seeded. The mailbox, usually tidy, was slightly ajar, stuffed with a visible clump of rain-dampened mail. A perimeter check. Instinct, not thought. He moved with a practiced quietness, his boots making no sound on the wet pavement. There were no lights on inside, but that was not unusual for this late hour. What was unusual was the front door. It was not latched. It hung open by a mere fraction of an inch, a dark, vertical slash in the familiar blue paint. He pushed it gently. The door swung inward without a sound, opening into the cavernous darkness of his own home. The air inside was stale, still. He could smell dust, and something else, something faintly sweet and sour, like spoiled milk. He did not call out Sarah's name. An operator never announced his position when clearing a structure. He slipped the duffel bag from his shoulder, letting it fall silently to the floor of the entryway. He stood perfectly still, listening, letting his eyes adjust to the gloom. The house felt empty, but not abandoned. There was a sense of recent life, a chaotic energy left hanging in the air. A pair of small shoes, impossibly tiny, lay overturned near the base of the stairs. A brightly colored plastic block sat alone in the middle of the living room floor. He moved from room to room. The kitchen was a mess of unwashed dishes, a sippy cup with a faded cartoon character on it resting on the counter. The living room had a strange new piece of furniture, a large, padded playpen, littered with soft toys. This was not his house anymore. It was an echo of it, a place reconfigured for a life he did not recognize. The photos on the mantelpiece were still there, their wedding, a trip to the coast, but they felt like artifacts from a different civilization. Then he heard it. A small, soft whimper from upstairs. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his movements fluid and silent. The sound led him to the master bedroom. Their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open, his hand hovering near the empty space on his hip where his sidearm should have been. The room was bathed in the soft, pale glow of a nightlight plugged into the wall. And in that faint light, he saw it. The sight that shattered the world he thought he was returning to. His and Sarah's bed was gone. In its place, arranged in a neat row against the far wall, were 3 identical wooden cribs. And in each crib, a small child was sleeping. 2 boys and a girl, their tiny chests rising and falling in the quiet rhythm of sleep. They were toddlers, maybe 2 years old, with the same shock of blonde hair as Sarah. Triplets. Michael's blood ran cold. The air in his lungs seemed to solidify. He physically stumbled back a step, his hand finding the doorframe to steady himself. This was not a variable. This was not a contingency he had ever planned for. His mind, trained to process threats and formulate responses, went utterly blank. Who were they? Where was Sarah? He felt a wave of nausea, the kind that comes from a sudden, violent disorientation. He backed out of the room, pulling the door quietly closed. He leaned against the wall in the hallway, his head swimming. He was an intruder in a life that was supposed to be his. His first coherent thought was a desperate need for context. For intelligence. He could not confront this situation blind. He needed a voice of reason, someone outside the blast radius of this emotional detonation. Father Thomas. He left the house as silently as he entered, pulling the door shut behind him. The night air felt sharp and cold against his skin. He walked, almost ran, the half-mile to St. Jude's Catholic Church, the old stone building a constant in a town that had suddenly become a foreign country. The rectory lights were on. Michael knocked, his knuckles rapping sharply against the heavy oak door. After a moment, it opened, and the familiar, aged face of Father Thomas appeared, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. The priest's eyes widened. The color drained from his face. "Michael," he whispered, his voice trembling. "My God! It cannot be." "Father," Michael said, his own voice sounding hollow and distant. "I need to talk to you." The priest ushered him inside, his hand on Michael's arm as if to confirm he was real. He led him into a small, cluttered study that smelled of old books and beeswax. Father Thomas sank into a worn leather chair, staring at Michael as if he were seeing a ghost. "We thought you were gone," the priest said softly. "The army, they notified Sarah over 2 years ago. Missing in action, presumed dead. We held a memorial service for you, son." The whole town came. The words hit Michael like shrapnel. MIA. Presumed dead. They had written him off. He had spent 18 months in a Taliban prison, holding on to the thought of home like a prayer, while back here, they were mourning him. A cold, hard anger began to build beneath his shock. "Sarah?" Michael asked, the name catching in his throat. "And the children?" Father Thomas sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "It is a tragedy piled on top of a tragedy, Michael. About 6 months after we thought we lost you, Sarah's sister, Karen, and her husband were killed. A car accident on the interstate. They left behind their children. The triplets." The pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. Liam, Noah, and Chloe. He remembered Karen announcing her pregnancy just before his deployment. Sarah was their only living relative, Father Thomas continued. "She was a wreck, Michael. Grieving you, then losing her sister. But she stepped up. She took those children in. She sold most of your furniture to make room, to buy cribs and clothes. She has been raising them on her own for almost 2 years. She works nights cleaning offices, just to make ends meet." The anger in Michael's chest receded, replaced by an overwhelming, crushing wave of guilt and a profound, aching sorrow for his wife. He had been focused on his own survival, his own pain, while she had been enduring an entirely different kind of war right here at home. She had been fighting for a family she inherited through loss, a family she built on the ashes of the one she thought she had lost forever. "Where is she, Father?" "She visits you," the priest said gently. "Every Friday night, she goes to the cemetery. Sits by the memorial stone we put up for you. She talks to you, I think." Michael found her there, a lone silhouette among the tombstones, illuminated by a pale moon. He watched from a distance as she knelt on the damp grass, her hand resting on a small, granite marker bearing his name. The sight broke something inside him. The soldier, the operator, the man who had walled off his heart to survive, finally fractured. He approached slowly. She did not hear him until he was only a few feet away. When she looked up and saw him standing there, a living spectre in the moonlight, she let out a small, sharp cry of pure shock. "Michael!" Her voice was a fragile whisper. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear. "No. You're not real." "I'm real, Sarah," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. They held me for 18 months. I tried to get word out." She stared at him, her body trembling. Then the shock gave way to a storm of emotion. 2 years of grief, loneliness, and exhaustion erupted to the surface. "They told me you were dead," she cried, tears streaming down her face. "They gave me a flag. We had a funeral. What was I supposed to do?" "I know," he said, taking a tentative step closer. "Father Thomas told me everything. About Karen. About the kids. They're my kids now," she said, her voice fiercely protective. "They're all I have left." The accusation hung unspoken in the air between them, "because I lost you." "I know," he repeated softly. He saw the exhaustion etched into her face, the deep, dark circles under her eyes. He saw a survivor, just like him. They had both been fighting wars on different fronts. They stood in the silence of the graveyard for a long time, the chasm of 2 lost years between them. The life he had dreamed of was gone. The woman he had left was not the same woman standing before him. She had been forged into someone new by grief and responsibility. And he was a stranger, a ghost returned from the dead to a life that had moved on without him. He spent that night in a sterile motel room on the edge of town. The impersonal quiet gave him space to think. He lay on the stiff bed, staring at the textured ceiling, and stripped the situation down to its core components, the way he would analyze a mission dossier. The objective, returning to his old life, was compromised. The target, the happy, simple reunion with his wife, was no longer viable. The terrain had changed irrevocably. He was dealing with new, non-hostile assets, 3 small children. He was dealing with a key player, Sarah, who had sustained heavy emotional casualties and adapted her strategy for long-term survival. A frontal assault, demanding his old life back, would be a catastrophic failure. It would destroy her, and it would destroy him. His training had taught him one thing above all else: adapt or die. The old mission was scrubbed. He had to accept the new intelligence, re-evaluate his objectives, and formulate a new plan of action. He could retreat. He could walk away, leave Sarah and the children to the life they had built in his absence. He could become the ghost they already thought he was, a sad story they told once in a while. Or he could advance. He could advance into this new, terrifying, complicated territory. He could accept a new mission, one for which he had no training and no precedent. The mission of being a husband to a woman he barely knew anymore, and a father to 3 children who were not his. The choice was stark. The soldier in him craved order, simplicity, a clear chain of command. But the man, the husband who still loved the woman crying in the cemetery, knew that life was not a mission. It was messy. It was complicated. And sometimes, the only way forward was through the chaos. The next morning, he did not knock. He used the key he still had on his chain, the metal cool and familiar in his hand. He let himself into the house. The sun was streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He could hear the children chattering in the living room, and Sarah's tired voice trying to corral them. He walked into the kitchen, took the carton of eggs from the refrigerator, and started making breakfast. He moved with a quiet purpose, cracking eggs into a bowl, finding a whisk, melting butter in a pan. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wary. She watched him, her arms crossed over her chest. She saw not a soldier demanding his place, but a man making scrambled eggs. One of the toddlers, a little girl with big blue eyes, toddled into the kitchen and stopped, staring up at him with open curiosity. She pointed a small finger at him. Michael crouched down, meeting her gaze. "Hey there," he said softly. "That's Chloe," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "The boys are Liam and Noah." He nodded, never taking his eyes off the little girl. He had faced down armed men without flinching, but the direct, innocent gaze of this child terrified him more than anything he had ever known. He was in uncharted territory, without a map or a compass. He scooped the finished eggs onto 3 small plastic plates, cutting them into tiny, manageable bites. He placed the plates on the low children's table in the dining area. He did not say a word. He just acted. He filled their sippy cups with milk. He wiped a smudge of jelly from Liam's cheek with his thumb. Sarah watched him, and for the first time since he had returned, he saw a flicker of something other than shock or grief in her eyes. It was a fragile, hesitant spark of something that looked almost like hope. The immediate crisis passed. An unspoken truce was called. He stayed in the guest room, giving her space. The days that followed were a grueling adjustment period. He learned the rhythms of this new life, the chaos of breakfast, the quiet of nap time, the nightly ritual of baths and bedtime stories. He learned the distinct personalities of the children. Liam was the stoic observer, Noah the boisterous adventurer, and Chloe the sensitive soul who needed extra cuddles. He applied his military discipline to this new domestic battlefield. He organized the chaotic mess of toys into designated zones. He established an efficient morning routine for getting everyone dressed and fed. He used his ingrained patience to sit through endless readings of the same picture book. He was not trying to replace their father. He was not even sure what he was trying to be. He was just there. A quiet, steady presence in their whirlwind of a life. A second pair of hands. Another adult to absorb the endless demands of 3 toddlers. 6 months later, the house looked different. Michael had fixed the broken fence in the backyard and planted a small vegetable garden. The guest room was now his room, but he spent most of his time in the noisy, vibrant chaos of the main living area. He had taken a job at the local hardware store, the simple, tangible work a balm for his soul. He was on the living room floor, showing Liam how to build a tower of blocks that would not fall over. Noah was reading a book to a row of stuffed animals, and Chloe was meticulously coloring, her tongue stuck out in concentration. Sarah came and sat on the sofa, a cup of coffee in her hand. She watched him for a moment, a small, genuine smile on her face. The deep exhaustion in her eyes had begun to fade, replaced by a weary but peaceful light. "You're good at that," she said softly. Michael looked up from the tower of blocks. "Logistics," he said with a slight grin. "Building a stable base is crucial for mission success." She laughed, a real, honest laugh. It was a sound he had missed more than he realized. They had not fixed everything. The past was still a landscape of scars and ghosts between them. But they were building something new on the ruins of what they had lost. It was not the life either of them had planned, but it was a life. He looked from her face to the 3 small children playing on the floor. His new fire team. His new squad. Their mission was not to retake a hill or secure a perimeter. It was to get through teething, to teach them to tie their shoes, to make sure they felt safe. The soldier had come home expecting to pick up where he left off. Instead, he had been given a new assignment. A harder assignment. A better one. This was his true homecoming. This was his new normal. And for the first time in a very long time, Staff Sergeant Michael Thorne felt like he was finally home.